Wow. Pura vida, mi gente. Much love and respect. Shalom. Thanks for tuning in once again, guys. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that and learning with me. Today, I want to just continue reading a book. We actually read chapter 1 of this book already. It was a great read, chapter 1. If you haven't checked out that video, it's this one right here. This is the cover. Make sure to catch that part again. We're going to go ahead and continue reading this book again. I have a lot of books, guys, that I want to get through. I've been sitting on these books for a while, and I just want to start reading them to you guys, even if it takes, a lot of videos and we read it together every chapter. It don't matter, as long as we just read them a little bit and get what we can out of it, pull out the babies out of the bathwater, Drop Nation, how we do. Chew the meat, spit out the bones. You know what I'm talking about. This author has actually 2 good books that we are going through. It's a very long chapter, so I try to pick out the most interesting parts of this chapter 2. And I just want to remind everybody, this author make everything almost white, like seem like everything that's great in civilization. If it was people, architects or people civilizing, it had to have been white people. So he makes Atlanteans white, Lemurians white, and all this other stuff white. I skip a lot of those opinions. I try to read what he can verify, or when he's quoting sources or things like that. That's the parts I try to read. So just know that. I'm going to show you what book it is. So if you guys want to read it on your own and read the whole chapter, go ahead. But you'll see what I'm talking about if you ever do. So I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter 2 of this book. Thanks for being here again, guys. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're gonna get into this book again. It's called Secret Cities of Old South America by Harold T. Wilkins. Again, Secret Cities of Old South America, Harold T. Wilkins. Make sure you watch that video I did on chapter 1 of this book so you can get the info of chapter 1. And now we're in chapter 2. It says, Iere, Atlantis, Unveiled. In August of 1930, the French Academy of Sciences, in a land where somewhere around 1905, someone left a large sum of money to endow researches into what is now, in some Orthodox quarters, satirically referred to Atlantology, solemnly discussed a monograph presented to them by Russian refugee living in Algiers. This gentleman, Monsieur Filipov, rightly pointed out that not only in the dialogues of Plato, derived from what the ancient Egyptian priests of Sais and Heliopolis told so long, but in Mexico and South America, there are ancient legends handed down from generations immemorial, telling about the engulfment of Atlantis and Rutas Mu by the ocean. They tell of a tremendous cosmic cataclysm which brought on volcanism and a great deluge of semi-global extent. Filipov emulated a previous scientific congress in pre-1914 Vienna. He said that the ancient Mexican and Egyptian traditions agreed that the island continent of Atlantis vanished when the sun was in the zodiacal sign of Cancer. Calculating from data based on the angle made by the spinning Earth and the polar axis with the plane of the ecliptic or the orbital path of the Earth's round the sun. That's the hijack, but he's talking about the precision of the equinoxes, okay? He reckoned that Atlantis sank into the ocean in the year 7,256 BC. This, of course, is around 3,000 years later than the time alleged by these Egyptian priests, Sanchez and Xenophis, to have been recorded in the ancient temple archives of old Egypt. Precision in the matter of the chronology of these catastrophes, of course. The facts and implications of these catastrophes are either unaccepted or ignored by Orthodox historians and encyclopedic historians, such as the late H.G. Wells. It's still impossible in a world calendar of events. Yet no scientific folklorist can or should disregard extremely ancient traditions on the Atlantis cataclysms, which exist to the same tenor both in Galway, Iere, and at the other end of a long line in the West Indian islands of the Caribbean. These myths, naive as they must be, yet crystallize a magic vision of unknown facts as one believes them to be, of astonishing character, strange facts relating to a lost world of which not even some forgotten Greek commentator on the dialogues of Plato's Solon can have dreamt. In the back country of the British West Indian islands of Trinidad, natives of Aboriginal stock assert that Trinidad is a very ancient country and many thousands of years ago formed part of the largest country in the world. This was at a time when there was no sea at all. This great antediluvian country or continent, the natives call Iere. Iere. You hear this? Iere. Pronounced almost exactly as Iere of Ireland. Listen to that. And old Trinidad, say the natives, prior to a great cataclysm that sank the lost continent, was also known as Iere. Alright, Trinidad was known as Iere. Where's the true Ireland? Where's the original Iere land? The Iere land, right? Gold goes on the tradition in Trinidad. Used to be brought by donkeys overland from the south, that is, ancient South America. In a day when no Caribbean sea separated Trinidad from this proto South America, something happened, say the back block Trinidadians, which broke up the land into little bits, and the sea came in from the north and the south and the whales. But the new people kept coming and many babies came. In those very ancient days, say the Trinidadian myths, people did not walk up or downstairs or tramp up hill and down. They hit a plate and made a song, which song said where they wanted to go, and they went. You hear that? What kind of technology is they talking about? And anybody could dance in the air like leaves blown by the wind. It was a very happy time, and there were no live slaves. All the live people sang and danced and feasted all the time. A native cook named Aldela or Grenada, West Indies, danced a dance which is identical with an Irish jig performed by old women in Galway. She said it was a fete dance performed all over the great country of Iere when the harvest was gathered, which maybe was corn or might be maize. Down in the south, she added, she meant ancient South America, and other natives of other West Indian islands have also this tradition. There was a golden serpent that everyone was afraid of, but I don't know much about that, except that it wore a spiked crown and danced when it was angry. And there was also a god there who threw golden knives when it thundered. My mother told me that the people of Trinidad, who are nearly all dead now, had come from the east, and that they ran away when the land broke up. That was when it was all went under the sea. In Grenada, West Indies, the upcountry, natives speak of the leprons and say that when people died, you had to have a wake for 2 days and make a great noise all the time in case you heard the Bondis wailing. If you heard them, you died in a year. Here and derived from no old Irish settler, one has a piece of folklore suggestive of some long vanished land link, which is identical with the wakes of modern Irie or Ireland, the leprechaun or lupracan, or wrinkled old man goblin of Celtic folklore. And it would seem with the banshee. All right, so look how they're comparing these myths from Trinidad with Ireland and the word land Irie and Ireland. It's a lot of coincidences here, right? An old man up country in Trinidad spoke of things he had seen done by the Ligarus or Ligarus, which he said were evil spirits in some places where folk had done very bad deeds. This must be an undoubted reference to the loop garu or werewolf or lycanthrope of old Teutonic or Anglo-Saxon folklore. It is as reminiscent of unpleasant black practices of West and Central African native black witch doctors as the making of hubbubs at wakes is of the Tibetan practice of banging drums and blowing horns to frighten ghosts from houses or villages in the dark hours. An old black native from upcountry in Grenada, West Indies. Again, an old black native, so called black, is acknowledging, right? From the upcountry in Grenada and West Indies had also something to say about the ancient gold road overland from South America to the land of Iere. He reiterated a legend about the expulsion of snakes from the Proto Antilia, which is strangely reminiscent of St. Patrick and the snakes of old Ireland. Said the old man, there are few snakes in the West Indies, because a great king once cursed them all, as one had bitten him, and them snakes all went to the south, down the golden road to the old places. Asked what he meant by old places, he replied, don't know, but thousands of years ago, you could walk down the gold road from here into South America. Many clever people lived in South America in those ancient days. He also alleged that in those ancient days, folk whose relatives neglected their obsequies, he used this word, did the heavy work in the fields because they didn't want no food and they kept on working all the time. And they didn't want no money, of course. But surely the old man did not really believe that the dead men were made to work. I, old man, said he, I see a lot of mighty queer things happen. What you suppose might be in them old times? Why? Anything. I believe 'cause everyone, he tell the same things all for years in these islands. Since I little boy I hear same stories all the time. All over and what I say is what everyone say must somehow be true. These dead men work all the time for a long time till more come. Everyone say they call them all zombies. Boss, he pays small money every time for overseer. That's all for they never get tired and don't want no feeding. And good mans like me don't have to do no hard work in them days. There don't seem to be no zombies hereabouts. Spoken with great regret. Good mans like me don't have to do no hard work in them days. The old man then spoke of the gold road down which he thought the zombies went to work in mines. When they were no more needed, however, leaving that aside, he said that this gold road belonged to a very far off day, when gold came up from the south and Trinidad and all other places in the West Indies was one very big country. His old grandfather, however, had said that Grenada did not belong to the big country, but was post-cataclysmal in origin, or to give the old blackie's words, he says, as other people tell me, that when everything break up, same like volcano, only plenty volcanoes all to once, then big country be covered all with water, and Grenada come up from the sea to help people get saved from the waters. Same like the Caribs, that's how they come. Further question the old blackie said, I do know if a new race came up from the sea, or if it was the old ones who escaped being drowned in the waters. But I think them Caribs was the people from the big country. No one knows exactly how it all happened, but it was very long time ago. There's plenty tales in Trinidad. About the land to the east, where the sun rose, this was probably Iere Atlantis. The old man said, that were true, too. Plenty land, plenty people, and they all teachers and very wise men, as plenty peoples often tell me. He also added one of those stories of immaculate conception, which, of course, far antedate any brand of Christianity, whether Byzantine, Greek, or Roman Catholic. In fact, later in this book, they will be seen related in ancient Mexican traditions to the wise man in black, the culture hero Quetzalcoatl, who was either an Atlantean from the motherland or from her imperial colony, High Brazil of South America. Now let us turn to the other end of the line of ancient tradition, in the land of Iere or Ireland. In Galway, there is also a very ancient tradition identical with that of the West Indian back block natives up country. It is, however, rather confused, but it is that long, long ago, Galway on the one side and Trinidad on the other formed part of a very large continent that was far from the sea. I shall have more to say on the Galway end of the myth in a few moments. An old woman who lived in the Carib settlement of in St. Vincent Island, West Indies, told an English lady of my acquaintance this same ancient tradition of a big country that disappeared into the sea after a colossal earthquake. It was a story she clearly had heard when she was a young child. The water came in, she said, and made the islands, but some of the islands, she had been told, had actually formed part of this ancient big country, to wit, modern Trinidad, West Indies, and Barbados. This old woman insisted that wakes had not been introduced into the West Indies by modern Irish settlers. No, she said, wakes were ordered by the Great Serpent thousands of years ago. They were for the purpose of frightening off bad spirits who lived in the craters of the dead volcanoes. The Caribs, she said, were the real owners of the big country, Iere, and had a king whose gold crown was in three parts. This reminds one of the triple tiara of the ancient Pontifex Maximus of pagan Rome, and his modern descendant, the Holy Father of Vatican Rome of Catholic Christianity. He wore this triple gold crown because, said the Carib woman, he had three sons and three daughters, and each son married a daughter. As we know, first degree marriages of this type were common in the Egypt of the pharaohs, the Peru of the Incas, and some say in old Atlantis, or some of her continental islands at a certain epoch. One of the king's sons went to the south, one to the southwest, and the third to the north. Caribs of that far day did not, she said, have to walk unless they wanted to. Their wise people could fly, quite easily, fly. No, they had no wings. What they did was to clap on gold plates, make music, and then they fly, make music and fly, was this technology. The old Carib woman then gave a version of the Golden Age and of the Great Deluge Cataclysm myth, in parentheses. And she says, everyone feasted and danced and sang. No one was ever poor or hungry. So they all got proud and everyone wanted to be king. And some very bad ones stole some sacred fire and destroyed plenty people because they did not do right. This story of stealing sacred fire, I shall refer to later. She was emphatic that the big country was not burnt up. People say it was the same like big spoliation. Everything broke. All the land broke. Same like broken everywhere. And the water came between all the pieces that was left and made islands. And there was plenty bloodshed. She could not explain why or when there was this bloodshed. The king was very angry. He said the sea should cover them all up and no one would know they had ever been alive. She then gives a variant of the Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Bochica legends of the culture heroes of ancient Central and South America. All right, I've done a lot of videos with that combination right there. It's all the same people, entity, dynasty, person, lineage. She says a very good man came from the east and made all the little islands and saved a lot of good Caribs. But for hundreds of thousands of years there was terrible times. Volcanoes everywhere threw out fire and it kept on raining and flooding everything. And soon the heavens burst one day and the earth burst all up and the big country disappeared. Same like the king said. Then there was no king again and all the people who escaped on the good saints' islands had to look after themselves until they were all killed by the new people who came from the east, except some of her ancestors. Then she added some curious details which are corroborated in other traditions and classic Greek or Latin writers about the state of the Atlantic after Atlantis completely vanished. No one after the terrible time could ever go to the east and to the land of the rising sun because they had no big boats, only little ones, and they couldn't fly no more and they had to work hard to live. It is curious that a late 13th century monk, nicknamed Solitarius or the Recluse, he was a learned scholiast, also mentions the state of the ocean after the sinking of Atlantis. This monk, Honorius Augustodunensis, lived at Autun about AD 1300, and writing about the Atlantis of Plato, he says that where it once stood, the sea is clogged and curdled. One might also suppose that Augustodunensis had some reason to believe that Atlantis was famed for a breed of sheep, very white and fleecy, yielding the best wool for dyeing purple, which in Greek myth he says was called the golden apples of the Hesperides, one of the Atlantean islands. All right, Hesperides. We've gone over this info in past videos. That was over here. Melon in Greek means either apples or sheep. The last surviving post-cataclysmal continental island of Atlantis was called by certain Greek writers Poseidon or Poseidonius. It was said by one Marcellus, a geographer, who may have lived some time after the first century of our own era, and who wrote the Ethiopian history, to have been the last of the Atlantean islands left after the great island was submerged. He cryptically says traditions about Atlantis had been collected by travelers in an inaccessible isle of the ocean. The inhabitants of the Atlantic isle of Poseidon, not less than 1,000 stadia, preserved a tradition handed down to them from their ancestors of the existence of the Atlantic island of a prodigious magnitude, which had really existed in those seas, in which during a long period of time governed all the islands in the Atlantic Ocean. From this not too clear passage, it seems that Poseidon must not be confused with the greater continent of Atlantis. Now let us glance back at the story of the long lost and mysterious continent called Iere, which is current among the older folks in Galway. It is of extraordinary interest to those who have reason to suppose that the empire of Atlantis extended far to the north. Indeed, I may here mention in passing that in a river creek called Hof, on the eastern coast of Iceland, is a cliff on which are carved a number of very ancient symbols or letters, two of which are identical with letters found in a dead city of Atlantean Brazil by the old bandeiristas about AD 1715. I've shown those glyphs in previous videos. Make sure to catch up with all the presentations. Continuing, Goff says no one is allowed to reach the impassable farther bounds of the Atlantic Ocean, owing to obstructing seaweed and failing winds. All right, now remember we've gone over this. According to the Greeks in their time, they couldn't navigate, they couldn't pass or cross the Atlantic. It was unnavigable, as Plato says, right? It is plainly inaccessible and unknown. Aristoteles, in his Meteorologica, says that the ocean outside the Pillars of Heracles is shallow, with mud, and calm, for it lies in a hollow. The Egyptian priest in Plato's dialogue of Timaeus rightly told Solon, the disappearance of the island of Atlantis in the depths of the sea made it in those parts impenetrable, because of the shoal of mud in the way caused by the subsidence of the island, all right? They couldn't get through, so muddy because of what had happened to Atlantis, the Atlantic, right? The Atlantic Ocean, or they used to call the Ethiopian Ocean. The old folk of Galway in western Erie say that the king of Galway in the very old far-off days was the greatest king in the world. He had 3 crowns, and 1 crown meant that he owned Africa, whence the gold came and the beautiful jewels. He sent one of his sons to Africa to make a great kingdom there that lasted 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000 years. And another son lived right away out in the west in the land of the setting sun, where all good men go when they die. There were no ships then, only boats, because there was not any sea at all, but only rivers and lakes.
All right, you guys hear that? When the waters were lower, you know, could possibly these oceans have been just rivers like the Atlantic? Is that the real Euphrates River? Like the four rivers. When there was more land, was these oceans a lot smaller? And was it really just rivers, like these large, great rivers? And all this great land was called Iere, pronounced Iere, Iere. And the reader may compare these Irish folklore stories with those told above by natives of Grenada and Trinidad. They seem valid evidence of some long past land link between Galway and the West Indies. The Galway folklore gives us some remarkable glimpse of this vanished land of the Iere Atlantis. There was, say the old folk of Galway, a broad highway very beautiful with lights all the way that led to the Isles of the West, or the Blessed. And those isles were many months' journey along the great road. At intervals on the highway were roads that led to other parts of the great kingdom of Iere, or Iere. One road led to a wonderful land where the people were all black, so-called black. Further north, the people were all tall and handsome and drove about in golden chariots. They had great buildings too, the like of which were never seen in Ireland. And those buildings had no stairways because in those far off days everyone could fly. There was a terrible devil who lived in the west, beyond the isles of the blessed. He lived on newborn babies, and he had a serpent who ate live goats. He was indeed terrible and tried every way he could think of to make men bad. One Dr. Forrest is said to have found in the West Indian island of Antigua carved stone work of unknown and ancient date, cut from stone that is quarried only in Ireland. All right, what? In Antigua. No one in Antigua could give him any information about this stone, except that it was very ancient and of origin unknown. Southey, in his commonplace book, says that the folk of Arranmore, the largest of the southern isles of Arran on the coast of Galway, are still persuaded that on a clear day can see from this coast High Brazil, or Brazil, the royal island, the enchanted island, the paradise of the pagan Irish, of which they relate a number of romantic stories. Conical buildings are on it, from George H. Flattery to the author. All right, so real quick, they're talking about this place in the British Isles. It's Arran. I'm going to show you guys something about Arran and its inhabitants. Again, they're talking about the inhabitants of Arran telling the story about this High Brazil royal island, this enchanted island in the Atlantic, right? All right, so he was just quoting the inhabitants of Arran, supposedly, right? Arran is an island here. Yeah, it's near Ireland and also part of the Western Islands of Scotland, so it's off the shore of Scotland as well. And this book here in my video, Physical Descriptions of the Original People of Europe, Part 1, the book, A Description of the Western Islands of Scotland. So here it talks about, in this part of the book, the Isle of Arran, right? The people of Arran. It's going to tell us what they look like. It says the inhabitants of this isle are well proportioned, generally brown, right? Generally brown, and some of a black complexion. They enjoy a good state of health and have a genius for all callings or employment, all right? Who? The people of the Isle or the island of Arran, all right? British Isles, again, they're generally brown, some are black. Going back to the book, again, they were talking about Southey in his commonplace book says that the folk of Arranmore, the largest of the southern isles, right, the Isle of Arran on the coast of Galway, this is what they say. Remember, they are brown and so-called black complexioned people, are still persuaded, they say, that on a clear day they can see from this coast High Brazil, all right, the royal island, High Brazil, remember? So I just wanted to show you guys, let's not forget who we really talking about. Don't always think pale-skinned people when we're talking about, Irish, Scottish, or anything like that. It says here, Colonel Valancy in his Collectane de Rebus Hibernicis also says, the old Irish say that great part of Ireland was swallowed by the sea, and that the sunken part often rises and is to be seen on the horizon frequently from the northern coast or the northwest of the island. This part so appearing is called Tirhudi, or the city of the prophet. Hud, It contains a city which once possessed all the riches of the world, the key of which lies buried under some druidical monument. One might also mention that Buffon, the famous French naturalist, believed that Ireland and the Azores and America were once part of the great Atlantean isle of Plato. Ooh, this is what I be theorizing a lot of the time. I feel like some of the British Isles, or even all of it, was part of this land that was connected, uh, extended to America. You know, that's what I was theorizing. We may find this out one day, you know, if this is true, but it's telling us that this French naturalist, you know, thought the same thing. He said Ireland and Azores in America were once part of the great Atlantean isle of Plato, all right, and America, not separate from America, and America, meaning we still hear the part that didn't sink. Continuing a little more ahead, it says Grenada has a singular tradition that the last king of the big country of Haiti lies buried in an ancient tomb somewhere in the island of Barbados. But in Barbados itself, the tradition is that this ancient king was the last emperor of Constantinople. This imparts a singularly Byzantine twist to an ancient tradition. A word may be interjected at this place concerning the alleged power of defying gravitation, or as it is called, levitation. This power is by ancient tradition attributed to the rulers of Mu or Lemuria in relation to ships that could rise above the waves in violent storms. It is also said to have been possessed by the higher caste in old Atlantis. In the Andean highlands of Colombia, along the Rio Magdalena, is the very singular dead civilization of San Agustin. Cities or temple mausolea of a race unknown who left colossal statues, some of them portrait statues like those in Easter Island. This singular race practiced strange afterlife cults and underground tombs. A spur of this singular culture of a race unknown runs from eastern Colombia to the north, whence it extends to the territory around the Sea of Valencia, the Indian Tocarigua of North Venezuela. These underworld people appear to have had some cultural contact with Atlanteans of ancient Brazil's highlands, for on a gorro cap of a megalithic statue of a tusked man or deity, found in a very ancient tomb in the Andes of Colombia, are to be seen the engraved 8 letters, of which 7 occur in inscriptions copied by the bandeiristas of Brazil when he and his expedition blundered on the dead city in the little-known Sertão of Bahia province in AD 1750. Mariano Ribeiro and Ustariz and Teshudi, who reproduced this singular statute in their Antigüedades Peruanas, published in Vienna in 1851, did not realize the significance of this inscription. They supposed it had been engraved on the statue by someone in the train of the conquistadores of Jimenez de Quesada, sometime during or after the conquest of Nueva Granada, modern Colombia. I have pages 16 and 95 insert a sketch of this remarkable inscription. What appears to be branches of this extremely remote and mysterious megalithic race of early South America buried their dead in limestone ranges, and in tombs where the offerings may still be found. They had artisans, very skilled, who fashioned jewelry from gold, and had a system of terrace cultivation. Immense mounds of bones seemed to be the debris of ancient wakes, lying side by side with many stone tools and ornaments of clay. The funerary urns sometimes contain remains of 8 skeletons. There are ceramics which seem to indicate that this ancient race dwelt long by a lake, but what I especially wish to point out are fine small pendants with devices of bats and eagles in stone that are called by the German archaeologist Klangplatten. No explanation is made as to why these pendants are called clank plates or sound disc. Have we here anything to do with the alleged power of levitation ascribed in Central and South American folklore to ancient Central and South American races and to the Atlanteans and High Brazilian Atlanteans, whereby if one struck a disc on the correct pitch or note, the individual striker could rise in the air and fly? I have said in my book, Mysteries of Ancient South America, we've actually read that book, and I hope not with the dogmatism I am here girding at in others, that over old South America lies the shadow of Atlantis, okay? Now, a few words about this ancient land, whose very existence as a center of antediluvian civilization is a joke among many of the archaeologists and academicians who sit and pronounce ex cathedra from padded library chairs or professorial tribunes. The Atlanteans seem, according to certain traditions, to have been a coldly selfish race of the pure, dispassionate, cold-blooded, scientific caste-ruling type. The men were very tall, fair, all right, dodge the hijack, aquiline in nose and very good looking. Their women were blue-eyed. They were blue-eyed. All right, I'm gonna show you guys sign. Hold on, all right? Just hold that thought. Sometimes reddish haired, huh? And of great beauty of form and featured of the Hellenic type. They were, however, not a cruel or brutal or aggressive race. Now, before I continue, I want to show you guys something in case you guys forgot or you haven't watched my videos on the Black Irish or the Swarthy Europeans or anything like that, right? This author likes to kind of whitewash a lot, and they tend to do that in many books when they're telling about ancient peoples of America or any kind of ancient peoples, right? They start saying white, fair, pale, and all this other stuff, and then blue eyes. Like all this is supposed to indicate so-called white people, right? I'm gonna show you guys something real quick. All right? IrishCentral.com. Early Irish hunter-gatherers were dark-skinned with blue eyes, says expert. Dr. Lara Cassidy reveals in an Irish documentary that people who inhabited Ireland some 10,000 years ago had dark or black skin and bright blue eyes. All right, so we've been talking about Ireland, right? The land of Ireland, this connection to the West Indies, right? Irish Times says here early Irish people were dark-skinned with blue eyes. Dark skin with blue eyes. Blue eyes doesn't mean automatically that it's coming from pale-skinned people. All right, it's telling you right here, prehistoric Irish people were dark-skinned and had blue eyes. A new documentary claims the hunter-gatherer population that lived in Ireland 10,000 years ago do not have any of the pigmentation profiles associated with light skin. Okay, they weren't light skin at all. All right, look what they're showing you right here. You see, they look more like Bob Marley with blue eyes. Uh-oh. Moving on, the Irish Post. Oh, the Irish Post. Look at that. Ancient Irish people were black with blue eyes. A new documentary suggests. It's not just a new documentary. These are geneticists. You guys go watch the documentary. All right. It says here, scientists in the documentary used modern forensic techniques to explore Ireland's past, and they found evidence that black people lived here around 10,000 years ago. So you say, oh, leave our culture alone. You're trying to make everything so-called black. It's not me, all right? Geneticists are telling you. It says here, the journal.ie, first Irish populations had dark skin similar to Cheddar Man. DNA research suggests, okay? DNA research suggests, it's not just a documentary. It's likely that the early Irish populations had dark skin, similar to the Cheddar Man discovery made in the UK this week, according to genetic experts. According to the experts, not your opinions. You're not an expert, but the genetic experts are telling you. It's not just me. It's not anybody trying to make anybody so-called black. All right? This week, UK scientists confirmed that the first modern Briton had dark skin and blue eyes following groundbreaking DNA analysis of the remains of a man who lived 10,000 years ago, known as Cheddar Man, right? So even in London, Britain, right? The ancient Britons, we know about Cheddar Man already. Smithsonian Magazine.com. Early Britain had dark skin and light eyes. DNA analysis shows, not suggests, it shows. It shows. Okay. Cheddar Man. We're going to go back to the book. All right. He was talking about their women were blue-eyed. Oh, really? Oh, well, we know that doesn't mean pale skin. Okay. The early Irish Britons, the people of the Britain Isles, we read earlier, the people of Iran were in general brown skin and black, matching the genetics, right? Results. All right, so let's dodge all the hijack here with the whitewash and literally this author trying to include himself into ancient history. That's literally what he's trying to do. Something of it, albeit not very much, may find apparent if limited corroboration in what I said in my former book about the very ancient dead city ruins on the highlands of Brazil and behind the dense screen of Mato Grosso jungle and forest in Chapada. Some of it ties up with myths of cataclysms and dead lands told in the West Indies and in Mexico. Especially do some of these details following have relation to the drowned an entirely forgotten continent called Iere. All right, Iere in Legends of the West Indies and Galway. Okay, Atlantis had reached a high state of civilization, and any sea, in the sense of an environing ocean, was unknown. It will be recalled that both in Galway and Trinidad, the ancient native folklore says that there was no sea in relation to the great country of Iere that stretched from what is now the Caribbean to Ireland. From the Caribbean to Ireland. Again, what were the ancient Irish? The ancient Irish people were dark skinned with blue eyes, okay? And these ancient people must have lived on this country Iere, which actually was above water and connected to the Caribbean, huh? To the east, where the sun rose, there were very ancient lands. Indeed, Africa as a continent was covered with Atlantis Iere. In these ancient lands, there were centers of greater wisdom, but of less intellectuality and knowledge than in Atlantis, okay? Less, all right? They're letting you right now, it's not in Africa. They networked and dealt with Atlantis, but it wasn't Atlantis the center. Now and again, great men or sages came over to Atlantis from these ancient lands to deplore the lack of spirituality, or what we call mystical religion Atlantis. But the intellectuals and scientists of that great land treated the visitors as impractical dreamers or preachers with whom secular scientists and skeptical philosophers had no inclination to argue and who need not be treated seriously. Continue a little further in the book, Secret Cities of Old South America says here, the dead cities of gold and mystery lie, as one has said, round the littoral of the old Marañón Amazon basin and on the uplands of Proto-South America. Many of the expeditions to one region of the unknown, both European and American, and including that of the lost explorer Irwin, have been to the little-known territory watered by the branch of the Amazon tributaries, lying between Obidos and Santarém on the west, and Almereiron on the east, at the embound shore of this mighty waterway. Out of this terra incognita will one day come some startling discoveries, and these, an airship or multi-engined aeroplane, will play a valiant part, as the Latin Americans would say. Somewhere in the north of this region, running from the slopes of mostly unknown and unexplored sierras of the Tumac, Humac, and the Pararaima, is a great prehistoric highway known as the Inca Way. It apparently linked the territory of gold, gems, and ancient mysteries with what was later the Inca Empire of Quito and Cusco. Dense bush and far-spreading forests and jungles, beset with fierce Indians who use blowpipes and poison arrows, cover up much of this ancient imperial highway, whose markers may be coeval with the old Atlantean Empire of South America. Deep within this region, at a point where a number of affluents merge, and on the fringes of that mysterious land of Oyapoc, where lived the Conoris, or white Amazons of Sir Walter Raleigh's day, Dodge the Hijack, is one of the number of dead cities of megalithic date. Compare this following story with the account of another dead city in chapter 1. All right, make sure to catch that video. We read chapter 1 already. It says here, the jungle Indians who shun the place as taboo and sacred say that gold ingots lie in the dust of the dead city. They say it has pillars and naves of ancient temples and great buildings, gray and weathered with extreme age, that blaze with gold and sacerdotal jewels. Around the pillars of the friezes may be seen many hieroglyphic and bizarre letters of no known race. One of these dead cities, far within the forest and near the slopes of the Sierras, is approached by a great stairway of many steps going down, between walls of a towering cliff to an immense cavern or subterranean. The stairway is cut in the solid rock and is slippery with fungi and dripping with dank moisture. As one nears the bottom of the stairway, which at this point is inscribed with strange glyphs, one hears the roaring of tumultuous waters. A rushing river goes underground through the middle of the subterranean into a tunnel of more than a mile length. The roof comes down, and over the lip of a great crack in the rocks, the waters rush into a katadupa waterfall, at the bottom of which is a maelstrom. None know what lies beyond. Clearly, the spot is very dangerous. It is probable that beyond this tunnel lies the dead city, which is said to be about 3 miles long. The story sounds like a South American version of one of the late Sir Rider Haggard's novels. Attempts have been made by daring explorers to find a way into the dead city, where, as said, is much gold and many rich jewels, but all have been baffled. Within the subterranean approach, there is a hole in the cavern floor, at the bottom of which is a quadrate-shaped chamber, clearly of man's make, in which round the walls are numbers of oblong niches. These niches are 4/5 of their height walled up, with stones neatly laid on each other and cut by skilled masons. The explorer, as he casts round his torch in this eerie vault, starts back with an exclamation of horror. Over the top of the walling, there grinds at him a human skull attached to the skeleton which has been walled up, and some of the niches appear to be mummies. Just what cult of the underworld was practiced here is a riddle. It may be a queer mausoleum, or it may not. Cut into the rock over each niche are lines of strange letters of the type seen by the bandeiristas in that dead Atlantean city far south in Bahia. It is useless for explorers to expect any help from the forest Indians, even where one has succeeded in establishing fairly friendly relations. Not a man will venture near this vault of mystery, nor give any hint of the secret and cunningly concealed entrance to the dead city itself. It is likely that herein may lie the solution of the riddle of the disappearance of several American and British adventurers who have been lost in the Amazon jungles in the last 30 years. A man who ventured alone into this strange subterranean and who rafted himself down the underground streams till he was capsized and fell into the whirlpool, roaring far underground, would not leave the least trace to indicate what had happened to him, and the difficulty of locating the spot is very great. The tradition that gold ingots lie around in the dust of the ancient city is one more of those indications of a great cataclysm, forcing a hurried abandonment of a great center of culture and high civilization. What seem to be singular echoes of old Atlantis come from that tributary of the mighty Marañón Amazon, the Rio Trombetas, along whose banks, some 30 or more years after the Spanish conquest of Nueva Granada, modern Colombia, and Peru, there trekked northward a big company of South America's wife-fighting women. All right, the Amazons. So dodge the hijack. All right, see what I'm saying about this author? He tries to literally, now he literally is white watching like this history here of ancient South America. We already know Queen Khalifa. Now, come on now. White, yeah, so-called white, whatever he means by that. Pure, yeah. These remarkable women were by no means a figment of the imagination of the Orellana or the monk Carbajal who wrote the story of that amazing expedition of Castilian soldiers about the year 1535. J. Barbosa Rodriguez, speaking of the features a protector idol which embodies a Saturn-shaped frame that has long ears and an expression of suffering and sadness, as of one bearing the woes of world like Atlas or Quetzalcoatl. Continuing in the book Secret Cities of Old South America, we continue in chapter 2. It says here, the bearded men were the forerunners of cataclysms and floods that shook half the globe with quakes. They seem, as Burmese Smith import, also to have appeared in Asia, dressed in black. 1,000 years before the destruction of the world, a certain Nat came from superior abodes, his hair disheveled, his face sad, his garments black. He went everywhere in the public ways and streets, with mournful voice warning men of what was to come. Asiatic Researches from Burma, Volume 6, page 172. And one Nata also appeared as a culture hero and missioner in ancient Mexico. All right, you hear what they're saying? Again, another comparison. We got a lot of these comparisons with the ancient Hindu or Asiatic legends, myth, people, and that of Mesoamerica and South America. In this case, we got Nat and Nata, who was in Mexico, it says, right? He was a missioner. Apparently, in the far day before gigantic earthquakes and a great deluge sank the last fragments of the island continent of Mu in the Pacific and of Atlantis in the northern and southern regions of what is now the Atlantic Ocean. All right, so we still here. Yeah, there's parts under the ocean, but we're still standing here. Not all of it went down. If the fate of a prophet is not to be believed when he prophesies evil, it was certainly theirs. And in the case of Quetzalcoatl, man of peace, who abhorred human sacrifices, it was borne out in his case in ancient Mexico, as in a far later day in Babylon, that a wonderful and horrible thing is committed in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests bear rule by their means. And my people love to have it so. And what will ye do in the end thereof? Where Quetzalcoatl, Boshika, Viracocha, and other missionaries. And I would say that these three characters here are the same. That's what a lot of people believe that does the research on these three. It's the same person, just in different parts, because Quetzalcoatl is Mesoamerica, Boshika is in Colombia, Viracocha in the Andes in Peru, and other parts in South America. In the dim past of America, so the sacerdotal priests reaped and perverted before the last cataclysm that shook and sank Atlantis. All right. Quetzalcoatl and his missioners seem to have reached as far north as what is now British Columbia. Listen to this. Quetzalcoatl in British Columbia, the Drakan. There are on Indian totem poles in British Columbia the figures of men in ancient customs identical with those in Atlantean Brazil, carved on rocks. The Thompson Indians say that one Quagalal, a variant of the name Quetzalcoatl, came to what is now British Columbia, and with two others worked miracles and transformed things. That is, he gave them laws and civilized institutions, The lawgivers, Another of the riddles of ancient North America, and I shall have much to say of these riddles in a subsequent book, which has never been cleared up in the origin of the singular colossal carved images in cedar wood, found standing outside the doors of cabins in a deserted village of the Haida Indians of the Queen Charlotte Islands, British Columbia. They were observed when Lord Dufferin and Ava visited the place, and his steam yacht in 1876. The Indians were absent when his party came ashore. The colossal images were said, Molyneux St. John, carved in a way strangely recalling statuary found at excavations around Nineveh and Babylon, okay? All right? They were weird figures standing sentinel before the Indian houses, and their height was 40 feet and diameter of 2 or 3 feet. The wood was cedar, taken many ages to decay. The images were of griffins, birds, animals of unknown species, and grotesque human figures of all huge size, and certainly quite unknown to the Indians. Most of them were very elaborately done, and many were colored. In some of the cabins, the cedar had crumbled, which indicates the great age of the wood. Old, okay? All the colossal pillars were old and sound. The Indians knew nothing, or at least would say nothing about their origin, all right? Because they're not the people who made them. They also had carved walking sticks, crowned with small figures of unknown animals. Asked if the Indians would sell some of the pillars, one man replied, "No, and none of us will sell them." If any legends attached to these colossal pillars, the Dufferin party had neither time nor opportunity to discover. Farther east and south, the Algonquins of most of Canada and east of the Mississippi had among the Ojibwe tribes a legend of one Jesus. Yeah, so it's actually with a G most cases, but it's Kisis here, but it says, which sounds rather like Jesus, right? So make sure to check out the video I actually did on this. Yes, the word Jesus is an Algonquin Ojibwe word for the sun or moon. Yeah, it literally means the sun, S-U-N. How convenient, right? That it sounds just like Jesus, who was a giant wrapped in a shining blanket and came from the land of the whites, or the white land to the east. This, by the way, does not mean Palestine, as Catholic propagandists have sought to make out. It is a variant of the Quetzalcoatl story. The Mojaves of the lower Colorado River in Arizona and California spoke of the Mateville who went east, promising to return in later days and live with them. There was clearly more than one of these missioners in black, working in ancient North America thousands of years ago. Crosses and sun worshippers were found by puzzled recollect Francisco Christian Leclerc in 1675 among the Mi'kmaq branch of the Algonquins, tribes at Miramichi, New Brunswick. Nor were Quetzalcoatl and his missioners the only culture heroes wandering over the two Americas, Central and North. There are singular stories of enigmatic and extremely ancient preachers in both South and North America, who of course were not of Christian origin. These mysterious men have left strange footprints in great and ancient rocks in Brazil, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, and Paraguay. Such imprints are found in chalky rocks on or near the Mississippi. They are perfectly made in a block of stone about 8 feet long and 4 feet wide. My old friend James P. Nolan, gold prospector, has found such a footprint in a rock in the middle of a swamp where he has gone bumming on the trail in Nova Scotia. Their origin is a complete mystery. They were seen by the first colonists in that region. Whether or not, I believe it says, the mound builders had anything to do with the making is not known. Where the rocks are hard, some tools, perhaps of copper, tampered with by an art long since lost, may have been used. Such footprints are known in India, as at Nakhaur in Bihar, and Ibn Battuta, the famous Arabian traveler of Tangier, mentions Adam's footprint in Ceylon. All right, Ceylon. Human footprints carved in stone have also been found in ancient Egyptian temples of Karnak and Thebes. It is also curious that in Ceylon, where these footprints exist, the Buddhists say that among the 65 figures they profess to see traced on the enormous and ancient footprint of Adam or Buddha is the mystic cross, or Nandavartaya, the symbol of good luck, or the swastika. A very singular tradition found in Quito, Ecuador, relates to a very remarkable and megalithic monument enshrining some ancient memory of one of these mysterious missioners. It is an immense boulder which stands in the Llanura, or green plain of Callao, in the Ecuadorian province of La Tacunga, a little way of the main road. The Indians say that a man in black ascended this ancient boulder to preach to their ancestors. On the last occasion, he left an eternal memorial by stamping the print of his right foot in the rock, which he did by first taking off his sandals, or the Os Jotos, says Fran Juan de Velasco. From that time, they had the custom of venerating the stone, each day embellishing it with blooms and flowers, as they do to this day. I have seen it with the flowers and have attentively examined the boulder, observing the footprints with wonder. It is enough to see it to know that the footprint is not an artificial thing, but done naturally, as in wax. The same or another ancient missioner was known along the Marañón, or Amazon, right? The Mar Anon, the Anon Sea, Anon, Anion. Shout out Drop Nation. Continuing in the book, it says, these bearded men of South and Central America are also mixed up with legends of virgins, virgin births, ritual crosses, crucifixes, Good Fridays, Madonnas, Last Suppers, Eucharist, transubstantiations, resurrections, all of which, of course, are many thousands of years older than Roman Catholicism or any brand of Christology. They have no more to do with globe-trotting St. Thomases from Mylapore, India, than the man in the moon, or Ahasuerus, the wandering Jew. All right, he's saying it has nothing to do with that. As we have seen in the West Indies, these myths are linked with very ancient culture heroes such as Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl, the plum serpent, okay? The Chiapas Indians of Mexico said that Bocab was killed on a Friday, and we were told by ancient white-bearded men, Dash the hijack, in very remote times to confess and fast every Friday in honor of his death. It is also added as a memory of a great cataclysm that when Quetzalcoatl vanished, the sun and moon were covered in darkness, and only a single star remained in the sky. Humboldt in his Examen says that the Franciscan monk Mark de Niza crossed the 37th parallel, a line linking California with Virginia, seeking a bearded king Partarax, who adored a golden cross, the image of a woman called the Lady of Heaven. All right, so you guys hear that? Mark de Niza was looking for the king of Tartarax. Where? In North America. Torquemada and his Monarquía Indiana, Madrid, 1773, relates what the Otomi Indians told Fray Diego de Mercado in the 17th century. Said they to the friar, long, long ago, we Otomis had a book handed down from our forefathers and guarded by important persons, whose duty was to explain it. Between the columns of this book was painted a picture of a man crucified, whose face wore the look of sadness. The many leaves of this book were turned not by hand, but by a tiny stick kept along with the book for that purpose. The Otomis buried this ancient book in the ground as soon as the Spaniards arrived. The book was of extreme antiquity, illuminated and written in 2 columns. Torquemada also speaks of the Totonacs of Mexico, who sacrificed at an annual feast 18 men and women, whose ghosts were sent as messengers to the great God to ask him to send his son to renew the physical world. When he comes, all will grow better and the loaves of bread be much larger. Here again seems to be a reference to some man in black from old Atlantis or Atlantean Brazil. In the Quetzalcoatl myth, his mother is said to have been the virgin Chimalma, who, to cite Mendieta in his Historia Ecclesiastica, became pregnant from a small green stone, the Chalchuit, which fell in the temple one day when she was sweeping it out. The Toltecs said that the Tlaxcatelcs to Bernardino de Sahagún had a virgin-born god. The birth took place on a mountain, and the curious statement was made by the natives that these myths of immaculate conceptions, and of course, the Christian is no unique exception, were first given to the Toltecs by Quetzalcoatl. The Chiapas had the same story, even to the assertion that the virgin's son was killed on a Friday, and that the story came from bearded men in ancient times who taught them to fast and confess on every Friday in honor of this god, Bokub's death. Again, of course, the ancient phallic cross, always a sign of bloody sacrifices in Mu or Lemuria, and which was inherited by Constantine's Christian sacerdotalist, was encountered by the Spanish in America. The Genoese Cristobal de Columbus, the hijack, found it on one of the Bahamas Islands on 16 November 1492. Grijalva lands in Consumel Island of Yucatan in 1518, finds crosses by the dozen in and outside native temples, and in a plaza of a temple, a 9-foot-high cross of limestone to which the natives prayed for rain. All right, so a lot of crosses here in America. Again, has nothing to do with Christianity. We got a couple videos on that. One main video I have done. If you haven't checked it out, make sure to check it out. But yeah, they found crosses all over here. And again, that has nothing to do with Christianity. Continuing, it says, one man in Consumel said, "We worship that cross because a man more resplendent than the sun died on it." It is also to be noted that the ancient Asiatic Ma, or Ama, or goddess fish sign, taken over by the early Christians and figured on the walls of the catacombs in Rome, was found by Spaniards in AD 1576 on a marble bas-relief in the ancient Temple of the Cross in Mayan at Palenque. I believe this bas-relief is now at the United States National Museum at Washington, D.C. It is shaped like a Latin cross, surmounting which is a grotesque bird. The cross rests on a base ornamented with the fish symbol mentioned above. On each side are figures of priests making offerings or praying. At Santa Cruz de Tierra in Yucatan, the Indians showed the Spaniards a cross chiseled into a rock. Diego Duran, who wrote the Historia de las Indias de Nueva España, tells of a Spaniard at the time of the conquest of Mexico, who said under oath that he had seen a very ancient crucifix, not done by any friar or Christians, chiseled on the steep walls of a canyon in the country of the old Zapotecs. Another crucifix of the same ancient type was found sculptured on a rock near Tepic in the province of Jalisco, Mexico. There were also even deerskins seen, as Bernardino de Sahagún mentions, by Franciscan friars in the province of Oaxaca, Mexico. Painted on them were pictures which showed two women looking at a wooden cross held by a third, on which was a naked man stretched on the cross, again extremely ancient and pre-Christian, to which his hands and feet were tied with thongs. Continuing a little ahead in the book, it says here, in other cases, Helot races of the former Atlantean Empire of South America seem to have fallen heirs to the dead cities, wherein in regions of unexplored Brazilian Guiana, they still survive today, as stories in my former book show. One of these dead cities was located in the times of the Spanish conquistadores. It was found on the banks of the Rio Binaque in Peru, where Cieza de León and Herrera heard of white-bearded ancient men who built very large and ancient buildings, still to be seen in the 16th century AD. Whether or not the Atlanteans had anything to do with the square and very ancient buildings with 3 windows in each of 4 walls, seen by Oseri, companion of Castelnau, on top of a mountain near Ollantaytambo, Peru, and apparently pre-Inca in origins, is not clear. Its possible purpose was astronomical. Osiri was murdered by his guides on the Marañón, or Rio Amazon. From time to time, migratory impulses have seized on Indians in Brazil who had memories of the golden age of old Atlantis or Atlantean High Brazil. For example, after the famous overland trek of de Orellana soldiers and monks about 1549, there arrived at Chachapoya in Peru 300 Indians who 10 years before, led by their cacique, Huirahuasu, the Great Bird, together with 2 Portuguese, had left the coast of Brazil to seek for a land of repose where no one died and rest was eternal. At the start, some 40,000 Indians took part in this movement across the center of South America. It put quiet in the shade any Mosaic wanderings of Hebrews in the peninsula of Sinai. A similar tale of a mass migration of Brazilian Indians is told in the Descripção Estado de Maranhão para Corupa e Rios de Amazonas by Mauricio de Iriarte, in the governorship of Dom Pedro de Melo in the year 1662. The beginning of these Tapinambaranas Indians of the province of Tapajos of the upper river Amazon by the Rio of the Tapinambaranas was not as natives of this river. They say that in 1600 their ancestors set out from Brazil in 3 bands in search of the terrestrial paradise, a barbarian idea. They broke into the conquered countries and, having journeyed for a long time, reached that place and found abundance and many Indians. And as it was good, they besieged it and conquered it, enslaving the natives, and in time they intermarried with them. But they did not omit to make the natives know that the Tapinambaranas are their superiors. Their rule is barbarous. They worship nothing. Their appetites are their gods. To those they rule, they give their daughters to wives. They have each 6 or 8 wives. Many natives fear them, for they are very vindictive. All right, you hear how these invading tribes came in the 1600s? You guys hear that? Who are these invading tribes and who was the original people that were there? There are other dead cities in ancient South America. In 1922, Jose Wolf, of the linguistic section of Museo de la Plata of the Argentina, found one of these ciudades encantadas, or enchanted cities, in the region of the Lago de Cardiel, in the territory of Santa Cruz of the Tehuelche Indians. It may also be here stated that this dead city may be identical with the one up the Rio Baker in southern Chile, whence at certain times of the year it is alleged come mysterious roars, clashes and clangings and noises at a time when the river floods, caused the frightened gaucho to bar his door fast, and he crosses himself in his cabin. He calls this also an enchanted city. Said Wolf, in the southern regions of the Argentina are marvelous ruins, fantasies of the 1001 Nights. In the region of Lago de Cardiel, I found great and splendid ruins, 164 yards long by 13 and 12 yards high. These ruined sculptures reveal considerably advanced artistic powers. They are remains of an unknown race that reached a high grade of culture. I found also to the north of Rio Santa Cruz a ravine full of inscriptions that stretch for about half a league, and these are enshrined the history of a great and vanished race. He says that what was most curious was that he found very near these mysterious megalithic ruins a race of troglodytes that lived perhaps 20,000 or 30,000 years ago. Wolf rightly says that these ancient black troglodytes must be the vestiges of the first men who lived in the American hemisphere, huh? Black, so-called black troglodytes? Now, troglodyte, in case you don't know, as it says here, Merriam-Webster's, you gotta dodge the hijack a little bit, but they're really trying to say like a savage caveman or something like that. A member of any various peoples as in antiquity, who lived or were reputed to live chiefly in caves, a person characterized by reclusive habits or outmoded or reactionary attitudes. So again, Wikipedia says literally cave goers were people mentioned in various locations by many ancient Greek and Roman geographers and historians, including Herodotus. All right, so that's kind of what he's talking about. Let's go back. Again, he's saying he found a bunch of so-called black troglodytes. They use a true city of caverns. In the immediate vicinity are ruins of ancient cemeteries, fortifications, etc. This troglodytic city is found on a campo, flat field called Douglas Esperanza. Also, there are numerous caverns in the zone comprehended between the Lagos San Martin and Cardiel. Also, I came on remains of the legendary Cidade Encantada, Enchanted City. At least such must be the ruins existing in the Chubut Cordillera. In the highest part of this cordillera are remains of an extremely ancient race. Among others, there are ruins of a building of a circular form that the aboriginals call a Casa do Sol, House of the Sun God. Traditions of this ancient race are found among the Tehuelches Indians. These Indians say that in the old days there was another ancient race they call Keukunk Ai, that is, people who were there before, derived from Keuk, before remote times. They say they were a race of high stature, and to them they attribute the ancient walls and inscriptions, all right? They're talking about giants. The Tehuelches never attained to such a culture, and the other mysterious constructions that are found in the region. These last are like enclosures, great and small, of unworked stones, and usually met with on the tops of solitary mountains or in lofty places. It seems they were built for defense. One of these edifices, especially curious, contained the tumulus of a chief, and could also have served for important assemblies. Ameghino, in his immortal work, The Antiquity of Man in La Plata, gives a sketch of prehistoric constructions that probably served in such places for assemblies. Who can say if one may not speak of a pre-Columbian Congress palace? There are some others that are not so high, in the shape of a semicircle, and they seem to have been made of merely transitory use, very likely for the chase, since one meets them in places adapted for hunting. Continuing the book, it says, how many European archaeologists, by the way, are even yet aware that in 1919, they were found along the Lago Cajari, in the valley of the Rio Pindare, in Brazilian Maranhão, vast stacked cities. All right, vast stacked cities in the lake. Esteirarias, standing in the middle of the lake. These stacked cities are visible only in exceptional summers, when the water level lowers and uncovers them. Locally, the natives call them encantada, enchanted, a term applied in South America to the mysterious dead cities. But in actual fact, they are American lake dwellings of a type unlike those found in Switzerland. In these stacked cities, there have been found stone axes and the green stone amulets, a symbol of resurrection, famed all the way from old China and ancient Mexico to far down in South America. Such green stones were carried in their great overland treks by the warrior, South American branch of old Europe's and Africa's Amazons. and bits of painted vases or zoomorphic and other types, all right? They're telling you carried out from America over to these places. Again, in the region of the Rio Moyar, Argentina, there are menhirs such as are found in Cornwall, Wales, and Brittany. They are megalithic monuments and examples of worldwide Neolithic diffusion of culture in a very far day. Some of them form a cattle post on the ranch of one Francisco Bacin, and about a foot and a half in the ground. One such menhir has been erected in the Parque Centenario at Tucumán. They are engraved with symbols, in some cases identical with those found in Europe, but one of them actually bears a living portrait of a man with a beard. Also at Cordoba, in the Argentina, are curious petroglyphs, one of which, shaped like a capital B, remarkably evokes the memory of those colored, inscribed pebbles found in the Assyrian culture on the left bank of the Arais, in the famous Mas de Asil. Among these pebbles in the Mas de Asil, by the way, are signs like the capital letters E, the Greek capital Mu, Theta, Iota, and Gamma, Upsilon, and Omega, and a Neolithic version of the famous backbone, symbol of resurrection, which in ancient Egypt was called the Tat, or Tat of Osiris. This region of the Argentina has not been properly explored by field workers yet, so one would not be surprised if symbols identical with these others of the Assyrian culture are also someday found there. Our last word shall be concerning these black troglodytes, so-called black cave dwellers of Brazil and other parts of South America, as well as of ancient Mexico and Darien. Remember, he says he thinks these are the most ancient people in South America. When Vasco Núñez de Balboa, leaving his ships and navy at Careta, went with some compañeros and Indian guides to see the cacique Torecha at Cuareca, Darien, he found black slaves and was told that the Cuarecans warred with blacks, so-called blacks, around there. They're from there, cerca de aquí. The blacks came from remote lands, Gomara in his Historia General de Indias. I remember reading Gomara and it said they were always from there, that they always had beef with them, the Indians that had them so-called as slaves. But they could mean from Brazil, right? He just said that they were in these caves in Brazil. There were traditions of these Aboriginal American blacks of very ancient date in American pueblos, all right? Aboriginal Americans, not from Africa, okay? There you go, that cleared it up, in case somebody had that in their mind. So there's many traditions of them from very ancient days in American pueblos and tribes in Darien. They said that when their ancestors first came to that region, it was inhabited by blacks of small stature who soon retired to the forest. Certain tribes, the Payas and Tapalizas and the Cunacunas, said their race sprang from the union of a woman Indian and a black woman with a man on the borders or banks of the Tatar Kura. How interesting that it says Tartar, right? Tartar Kura. Skulls with exaggerated prognatism and of a low residing type, found in the mountains of Sumapas by Dr. Juan de Dios Carrasquilla, seem connected with this ancient black race, so-called black. These Negroid skulls have a strong suggestion of the ancient Cro-Magnon man in Europe. Oh, they're just like the Cro-Magnon man in Europe, huh? These so-called black skulls, Negroid. But whether the red race of America originated from these ancient American blacks, of which the Otomis of Mexico, the Caracoles of Haiti, and the Aravos of the Orinoco, the Portuguese and Matayas of Brazil, the Chuamas of Darien, the Manabis of Quito, and the Albinos of Darien are the remains is very doubtful. Now, he just named known so-called black tribes that they have written about in a lot of anthropological books, which we have read already in past videos. So he's saying it's not even them. They're not related to these. These are another aboriginal so-called black race of America. Carlos Cuervo Marquez holds that the North Red American red race sprang from the aboriginal blacks of South America. Yet on the evidence of red Indian folklore, one may theorize that the red races are probably of early Atlantean origin. Their ancestors fled from one of the catastrophes that sank the old continent. They reached Egypt in a very early day. What Egypt? To marry. Later were the time of Pharaoh Psammetichus. After they had sojourned for many centuries in a territory along the Nile, they became a thorn in the sides of the pharaohs and thieves. What is more surprising is that they also became a source of irritation to the Asian nomads known as the Shashu or Hyksos, or shepherd kings who overran old Egypt. Continuing, it says those autochthonous blacks troubled Peru. An army of them invaded Peru in the time of Inca Yupanqui Pachacuti. So are you saying these ain't so-called copper-colored people? It just sounds like a more and more war to me. Shout out to Drop Nation. He was killed with a chimu arrow on his golden litter as he urged on his army to fight. As the Quechuas were not allowed an armistice to bury the dead, the stink of the carnage brought on a plague, which wiped out victor and vanquished. A ferocious army of the same black men even invaded the mountains and attacked the Inca Pachacuti VI. The body of a man was found under a house in Peru, which seemed to have no forehead. A lot of dried herbs had been buried with him, and also little pots and dolls. Naturally, the Peruvian Indians who saw the corpse thought of brujerias, and they said, he is an hechicero, a wizard. One theory was that the queer corpse was that of one of the Huara Indios of the coast of Peru, who have fine teeth, protruding negroid nostrils, and small foreheads, with the hair growing on each side from the ends of the eyebrows. It seems a moot point whether these Central and South American aboriginal blacks stand in the same relation to certain strange dwarfs in the country of the Tupinambas, Indios, at or near the mouth of the Rio Negro, Brazil, as do the ordinary Negroes to the pygmies of the Congos, all right? So, like I plan to show, all right, and this is very deep right here, because I have mentioned it sometimes that, doesn't mean pygmies originated in Africa just because they were there a long time. There was pygmies all over the world. We went over that in my newspaper article videos. We're going over old newspaper articles, and they found that. So they're letting you know they're not that much different than the pygmies of the Congo, okay? Pastelnau said they were like small children, and he saw some on the Rio Judua, who were the progeny of Indians and monkeys, all right? So that's Castelnau saying that. He's just being very derogative. It must be or may have been these oddities who gave rise to the story of debris about the men whose feet are all turned backwards. The Tupinambas called them Guayasis and alleged that their feet were all turned the wrong way, so that a person strange to them would always walk away from them if he trailed their tracks. Another name for them was the Mutayas, and they were slaves to the Tupinambas. It may be supposed that the great American head and diorite at Hueyepan, Mexico, and the gigantic axe Neolithic of Veracruz have suggestions of a Negroid type. But the true black aborigine of South America, who is also a troglodyte, and who may be of the same race as the mysterious cave dwellers of the cave city in Argentina mountains, is the small, squat, ugly, and dangerous Negro found in holes and caves of the unexplored central Brazilian swamp country, or the Moorish company, right? Moor also means swamp. So, we got Dash Tahaya when he's being, saying ugly and squat and all that, he's just being derogative. It is a lost Mesozoic world which Colonel P.H. Fawcett said lay about 100 miles from the dead Atlantean city he was seeking when he vanished in 1925-26. All right, so-called Negro people of ancient America, okay? Now he says, we got Dr. Hijack, they are cannibals, and as Fawcett said, all right, Dr. Hijack, although their only weapon is a club, they are extremely dangerous. Ethnologists know little about these people. I shall attempt to learn something about them, though any intercourse with them will be difficult and dangerous. Not only are Aimoris of Brazil Negroid, but many of them are black, despite a constant mixture of blood. Because those other mixtures are probably so-called Negroid too. That's why it's not changing. So you guys see what we're reading right now, right? Just correlating what we already know. All right. So Fawcett truly said, as have certain Latin American travelers and historians, that these same black South American troglodytes are the original inhabitants of the ancient Brazilian island. Original, that is to say, they were encountered there when the fair white gods of Atlantis first entered this ancient land. Dash the hijack, fair means beautiful. White could be pure. So again, this author and his idea The Atlanteans were all pale skin, you know. His translations, we gotta dodge the hijack, all right? Because South America was part of Atlantis, so he's not making sense. So he's saying it happened around what, 60 or 80,000 years ago? A time estimate that, of course, will cause the orthodox archaeologists to go all goosey and to ejaculate some word rather stronger than dear me or how amazing. As I end this chapter, I have a letter from a friend in the island of Tobago, Trinidad, West Indies. She writes, dim lore of a great lost continent, probably of Antilia, Atlantis, I find in this island. Negro workers on my husband's estate in the hills have a very vague story about very, very big men who once lived in this island of Tobago, British West Indies. But there wasn't no sea then. Then everything got smashed up. The Oli moon broke up and sea rushed in. After a time, Tobago came dry again, but very small. How long ago was it? It was long before anybody's grandfather could remember. No, not British white men. These big men who lived in these days so long ago, but not black men either. There is a lot of atmosphere in this island. I am intensely interested and shall try to get some more facts if I can, but it is difficult. All right, so that's how he ends this chapter. So pretty interesting chapter. I just wanted to get through it, guys. It's actually very long. I skipped a lot. A lot of it is the guy's opinions, the author, and then he starts going off with other stuff that has nothing to do with it. Tries to compare things that are unrelated. All right, you guys can get the book and read it yourself so you can see what I'm saying. But I just wanted to get through the book because there is some pretty interesting information here in different chapters. I mean, chapter 1 was very good. If you guys, again, missed part 1 or chapter 1 of this reading of this book, make sure to catch that again so you can see what we read, what we went over. We're going to try to read this whole book and many other books that I got stored here that I've bought and I haven't even read them. So again, I want to make sure I get through these books with you guys. I love reading it with you guys and learning with you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this reading. A lot of interesting stuff, you know, whatever your research is, whatever you can gain from it, you know, hope it helps in some way. And again, just trying to read different things so we can be able to draw our own conclusions and learn more and more of what others have said about ancient America. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.
Oh You're chilling in the rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite.